Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, folks who are able to join for our HED 634 Quality Assurance in Higher Education live session. And for folks who can't join, we're recording so you can watch this. I'm super excited to have Dr. Michael Christakis here, longtime colleague and friend. He's always great for speaking about anything, but I thought he'd be an excellent perspective for us to hear in this course as we're thinking about quality assurance. His perspective, especially being on the student affairs side of things, as well as he's a faculty member. So I figured we'd start it off, Mike, by you just giving us your backstory and where you are now.
Sure. So thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Always a pleasure to spend some time with Joe Levy. I will put that on the record. So Mike Christakis, he, him, his. I'm the VP for Student Affairs at the University at Albany. Have been at UAlbany for, get this, 23 years, which is crazy to me. Have been vice president for 7 of those years, which also is a little bit nutty to me. Started in residential life as a hall director, so those are my roots. I'll go a little bit further and say that as an undergrad, I was an RA, so my res life days go way back. Got into the sort of data assessment space somewhat accidentally. Was completing my PhD in public administration and policy from UAlbany, received my PhD in 2005, and the director of Res Life at the time was really trying to drive on assessment, right? Key performance indicators, assessment, learning outcomes. And so she pulls me in shortly after I had my doctorate, and she's like, "Hey, Mike, I need you to lead the department's assessment committee." I'm like, "What the heck do I know about assessment?" She's like, "I don't know what you know, but you got a PhD, so you're going to do it." I'm like, "Okay." So we sort of delved into it. It was easy going initially, to be honest. A lot of it was just straight up satisfaction data, right? Like we would do the Akuhoai, survey, and we'd get it back. Say, "Oh, students really hate the housing assignment process, or they don't like this. What can we do to improve it?" So on and so forth. I will sort of offer that those early, the opportunities that I had to cut my teeth on some of this stuff have actually given rise to, in some ways, how I try to lead now with my team in terms of what I'm asking them to share with me with regard to our students' experiences and perspectives and what we do here and what we do know from our students and what we end up doing to try to improve and enhance the student experience at the University of Albany. So I was doing Res Life for a while, and then in 2005, led the assessment committee. In 2007, the interim VP for student affairs at the time, on a Friday afternoon, actually, and on a Friday afternoon in October, ironically, called me and said, I need to. She was actually associate VP, was about to become the interim VP. The announcement just made. "I need you to come over. I need to ask you something." So I come over, and she goes, "Hey," she's like, we're up for our middle states reaccreditation. Student affairs got dinged pretty bad during the last decennial review. I need somebody to focus on it exclusively, and I think you're the guy." And I'm like, I don't know if I'm the guy. Like I literally just started doing this stuff. And she was, Chris was very, she was a tremendous mentor and support. She said, "You've done great stuff in Res Life. We finally turned the corner on some of this. How are we actually using data to make improvements? I want you to do that, divisionally." And so, I dove into it, and in November of 2007, I made the move over to the VP's office as assistant to the VP with specific emphasis on assessment. Tried to grow our assessment program. And we'll acknowledge that I was super frustrated the first couple of years. That it just was not happening quickly at all. People were not buying into it. It was extremely frustrating because they were afraid of it, quite honestly. I mean, I can say that with confidence now because they told me as much after we finally got our program running. And so, I remember I was putting in for all these program proposals for NASPA because I felt like I had the model of how this was going to work. And I kept on getting denied. And Joe knows this because we did a couple presentations together back in the day, because there was no there at that stage of the game. Like there's got to be there. And there was no there. There was just a lot of ideas and hot air is what it was. There was no evidence of impact, which I think is for me is a big part of what assessment writ large is about, right? Impact of assessment. Like what are you actually getting at? What are we gaining? What are we going to change? So we finally got there. We probably got there about 3 years in, and at that point, I became an assistant VP with for basically sort of the student life portfolio. So it was assessment. She had me continue to do assessment, but I was also taking on student activities, housing, campus recreation, which I enjoyed, and then did that for a period of time. And then there was a series of retirements. The associate VP retired. So I became associate VP, so the sort of senior deputy. And then 4 months later, the VP had some family issues. Her dad had taken ill, said she was retiring. So I became interim VP, which was a total surprise. I didn't think that was going to happen that quickly. And so I was interim VP for 4 months and did a lot. Approached it. But a dean who had been interim for a very long time basically said, approach it like it's your job. Don't approach it with any kind of reservation. So I did, guns blazing. And I got the VP job probably 3.5 months later, to which point a colleague at another institution is like, I don't think I've seen anybody get an interim gig that passed an interim gig. So like, what did you do? I'm like, you know what? Shock and awe. Just shock and awe. We did everything and anything. We made an impact. We made an impact on retention, actually, in that very short period of time, which to me is also an important part of what we need to do, because it was a need we needed to fill. And I've been VP ever since. My portfolio has expanded since I've been in this role. So, and here, when I first assumed this role, it was the traditional student affairs portfolio. And about 4.5 years ago, the president asked me to take on enrollment management as well. That's a whole thing. That's a whole thing, but I think it's a whole thing that's also important as we talk about sort of quality assurance, quite honestly, because I think there are some very tangible ways that our work broadly in the academy, certainly in student affairs, impacts our work that really does connect very explicitly to the enrollment management enterprise, both in the recruitment space, but also, financial aid, student accounts, registrar, and the like. So that's my story. I've been, we'll just sort of share, I've been very involved with NASPA, the Student Affairs Association. Have also been involved with Omicron Delta Kappa, the National Leadership Honor Society. I was national president for a period there. I'm a fellow of the State Academy for Public Administration here in New York. And as Joe noted, I do teach a class a semester in public administration and policy. So that's the quick and dirty. It probably wasn't that quick. I apologize. But you're excited to be here, and again, Joe, thanks for including me and for the invitation to join you.
Yeah, one of the things I just want to touch on, because, and I noticed I made note of this in some of our hypothesis discussions this week, of the fact that you all got a note on co-curricular and student affairs like back in 2007 from your accreditor, because in my head, I feel like student affairs assessment and attention to quality assurance for student affairs has been a pretty long-standing thing. Now, certainly assessment and student learning, it's more been coming along the past 15 years or so, but more and more, I feel like every year there are more and more institutions that have gone through now like their 10-year reaffirmation and co-curricular assessment, student affairs assessment is top on the list.
Look, and I will tell you, that so 07, the decennial review was in 10, so we were prepping for a 2010 review. When the reviewers came, we'd been a good 3 years into this process. In the report out, so the reviewers review, if you will, our student affairs assessment program, which again 10 years previous was dinged, in the 2010 review was noted as a, whatever they call it in middle states, like it was a commendation or whatever, like it was called. It was explicitly said. I mean, in fact, part of me should find it and like frame it like student, commendations to student affairs for right? Using data effectively, continuous commitment to continuous improvement. We'd introduced a program review process for all of our units that try to replicate what our academic units were doing, right? Where a unit would get reviewed in self-study, external reviewers, corrective action plan, right? And so they were, Middle States, they were over the moon on that. Charlie Fay, ironically, who's a longtime VP, and at the time I think was at Akron, was our reviewer. He was the student affairs guy on the review team. And he said at that time he had not seen anybody doing this level of work in student affairs assessment. So it was a feather in our cap for sure.
So you've touched on this a little bit, and I'm saving a question that I thought of even around the enrollment management piece, but just to take a step back, how would you define quality assurance, and does your definition align with how your institution would maybe define quality assurance?
Man. So it's funny. So I was thinking about this thing, but part of me is like, how would I define quality assurance? Right. So good question, Joe. For me, it's about the services, the programs the resources we provide to students, to their families, and to faculty, right? Again, I'm going to note that the registrar reports to me. And so the registrar constantly reminds me that, yes, the degree audit is used, the student needs the degree audit, but academic advisors actually use it to do guidance, and faculty use the registrar for class placement and room. So lots of stakeholders that we're engaged with. And so for me, when I'm thinking about quality assurance, it's trying to reflect on what kinds of services and programs and resources, and the quality of those programs and services and resources to our stakeholders, whoever those folks are. Most primarily, obviously, our students, but also, by extension, their families. I mean, we're what I would characterize as a diverse institution, right? We've got about 47% historically underrepresented students at Albany. We've got 42% Pell eligible, so there's a needy population. So 33% first gen. So serving students is important, but increasingly, particularly as our student population has evolved, the concentric circle of their supports also are folks that we're engaging with. And I'm happy to say we've leaned in on that. Like we don't run away from engaging parents. We don't run away from engaging community partners on stuff. But for me, quality assurance is really the quality of the programs and services we're providing, and ensuring that we're providing the right types of services. And this is where, again, I'm not sure if our conversation will naturally get there, but I was on a call last week with other VPs. It was a NASPA call. I'm on the Scott Academy board. And the question came up about, limited resources. We have less dollars, right? Some of it's enrollment related, some of it's post-COVID related. And so the question was, how are you determining which programs or services you're eliminating? And so I raised my hand. I'm like, we're not doing it very well, because I've asked my team for the last 4 years I've given them permission to identify something and to cut it, right? Because my thing has been, particularly in student affairs, we just take, right? Here's a good idea, and I'm going to do that. Well, what are you going to drop? I'm not going to drop anything. I'm going to take it on. Okay. Here's an idea. Okay. Where are you getting the resource for that? I'm just going to trim a little bit here from an existing program, trim a little bit here. So I'm going to reduce the support and resources to other programs. Are they not working? No, they're working. Are you sure they're working? I think they're working. And I'm going to continue to sort of empire build, for lack of a better word. Some of it is also a cultural thing of student affairs, right? We want to make the case that we're relevant, right? We count. The co-curricular experience is important. I'll acknowledge that having a division that includes enrollment management makes you a lot more relevant, quite honestly. I didn't realize that fully until I had taken on that role. It's got its pluses and minuses, to be very honest with you. But again, long way of getting at what is quality assurance? Quality assurance is ensuring that we're actually providing high quality services, impactful programs and services to the populations that we serve. How well do we do quality assurance? I think it's hit or miss, quite honestly. I wish we were better at it. My division is a large-ish division. It's not the biggest, but it's certainly not the smallest. So there's lots of offices and people and programs that we put on. Some things we do really well, a lot of things we do okay. And I will tell you, quite honestly, this notion of, hey, I'm going to give you the authorization to reduce something isn't just for me. The president told me to do it. The president literally was sitting at a cabinet meeting 4 years ago, and he's like, what? This is what I need. He said to the entire cabinet, I need you to find out what you're doing well, what you're doing okay, and what you're doing not so well. And I need you to stop doing the things you're doing not so well. That's what he said to us. And he said it a couple of times. And so I went and said the same thing. Right. But quite honestly, way, way easier said than done. I mean, way easier said than done, because of all, and you all know this, all the complicated threads with people and programs and lines and grants and all these things that when you begin to sort of pull at one part of it, it unravels something over here that is not intended to unravel. So I don't know if that really gets at it, Joe. Again, I was trying to sort of like, what does it mean to me? That to me, it's like, what, I want excellence, right? Whenever there's a call for an award, NASPA Excellence Awards, SUNY Outstanding Student Affairs Program Award, that to me is sort of the litmus test on the quality of a program, because it's external validation that there's an impact. And in each of those awards processes, I will not sign off on the letter unless we have data in the application, right? In part because I've been on the review side. Super frustrating when it's nothing but sort of narrative and like, how do I know this is working? Like, how do I know this is working? Like, it drives me crazy. And I know that I've got team members that submit that kind of stuff. But again, as much as I can control it, it's like, no, you're not submitting that. Like, you've been doing this program for 3 years. Put the data in. Like, it's good. It's okay to share the data. Good, bad, and indifferent, quite honestly. Like, data is not just, and this was just to go back to what I was saying about culture. It's not just about the good data. It's not just about the data that suggests you're doing a good job, not good data, but the high satisfaction or demonstrating learning. I actually think in some ways the other data that shows gaps or deficiencies, that's more exciting for me, quite honestly, right? Those early days of Res Life, Akuho I wasn't looking for the high means. I was looking for the ones that were in the gutter, right? Like, why am I trying to move 4.2 to 4.3? I'm trying to move like 0.89 to 4. Like, that's where the opportunity is, with 4 being a better rating. And that's where I needed to get folks around the idea of, if there's an area that there's deficiency in, the opportunity with assessment or quality assurance is to set a spotlight on it, make a case for additional resources and support, so you can actually make a significant impact on that program and on the outcomes of that program. And so that's where I think, just on the enrollment management side, that's where I think issues around recruitment and retention, when you're talking about sort of outcomes and big, high-level national metrics, and this is, I'm beating this drum, retention. everybody's got to do retention. It is a significant metric. So I did a division meeting last month, and it was nothing but a bunch of very sobering slides that showed retention rates that were flat over 12 years, right? Hovering right at that 83%. Nothing. I mean, there was a lot of this, but if you were to sort of draw a line, it's basically flat. And I'm saying to the team, I'm challenging you all. How do you move that dial? What are you doing? What are we doing? Right? What am I doing to move that retention number from 83 to 84%? There was a part of the graph that actually bumped. That was that first year I was saying I was interim VP. It had a lot less to do with me, by the way, than it had to do with what we were doing with a particular population of students, our educational opportunity program, which retains way higher. There was a much larger class, right? So if you sort of unpack the data, you see how that we retain better. But it was a blip, right? It went from 81% to 84%, super high jump in retention for 1 year, but then it completely fell off. It wasn't sustainable. So it's challenging folks to be thinking about how we impact retention. Graduation rates, another one, right? And in student affairs, retention and graduation rates are these things that, like, I feel like sometimes we have a very hard time wrapping our minds around, right? How can I support retention? You can support retention. Issues around belonging and inclusion, connecting them with academic resources and support. Financial aid's got a huge role in retention. There are roles that we can sort of have, that we have as it relates to retention, persistence, and certainly graduation. I totally deviated. I'm sorry, but that's, a very long-winded. The question was quality assurance. It's about the quality. It's about excellence in my mind, quite honestly, Joe.
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched on so many things that get complex, especially when you think about the to some extent there's times where let me rephrase. I think there are higher education professionals who believe it's either or. You either are trying to sustain and grow the institution, or you are trying to do right and best by students. And I draw that dichotomy because you talk about enrollment and you talk about retention. What's a metric institutions love to report but don't love talking about too much is completion, because our CFO says this all the time. To a certain extent, he hates to see students graduate because that means
I think CFO
their tuition dollar.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and it's great because there is a true tension there at most institutions, right? My president and I hate, and I have for some time, the 6-year graduation rate. Right, the 6-year graduation rate. If you were to hear my president, Avidan Rodriguez, talk about it, he thinks that's a complete failure in U.S. higher education more broadly. That we were even reporting out a 6-year graduation rate. Now, that said, let me also acknowledge that Avidan also knows that first-gen low-income students sometimes need to work and therefore cannot carry a full load and therefore need to stay in school longer. So I'm not saying he is looking at this from a completely privileged position, right? He's first-gen, low-income Pell. He was supposed to be a mechanic, he will tell you, right? And he ended up running a major research university. But you're right. My CFO says the same thing. He's like, I don't want him out in 4 years. 6 years is fine. That's 2 more years. That's 2 more years of tuition for me. It's true. I mean, it's a really slimy statistic when you think of it. But you're 100% right. You're 100% right there. One of our stats, I will tell you, is our time to degree for our undergrads is 4.1 years. So actually, we're pretty quick on it. We have a lot of students that finish in 3 because they come in with high school advanced, college credits. And we also really promote, the 4+1s, quite honestly, because for the 4+1s make my CFO feel a little bit better, right? Because he's like, all right, well, you run through a bachelor's, but at least I'm giving you for a year of master's, right? So that's in some ways a new input for him in terms of the budget, the revenue projection. But yeah, that's a tension. That's a tension for sure.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll make a point, allow you to respond, and then we got some questions in the chat. But yeah, I think too often leadership can be in one camp or the other, right? Or that they lean too much one way toward in the tension versus another, or sitting in the uncomfortable middle, right? And saying it can be a both and, right? And we can, mourn and celebrate both of these things instead of, taking a hard stance one way or another. And I think about, one of the things, and you might appreciate this, having enrollment, come under your umbrella and an eye-opening code, but I'm a reviewer for the excellence in assessment designation that institutions can apply for and get. And because I'm a reviewer, they sent a letter to our provost saying, congrats and thanks, Joe, for contributing to the field. But our provost thought, oh my gosh, this sounds cool. And you obviously do good assessment things. How about we apply for this?
Yeah, we should get it. We've got Joe Levy.
I said, we wouldn't get it. And they said, well, why not? I said, we wouldn't get it. So they're like, well, let's talk about it. Let's set a goal and let's do this. I said, here's why. I'll tell you right now. And you tell me if these things are going to change, then I will earnestly set this goal and we can work towards it. I said, but we have 3 meetings a week with our institutional leadership about enrollment. 3 a week. Compound that by the month, the year, so forth. Do you know how many assessment meetings we have with president's cabinet? 0. So I was like, until that changes,
you're 100%
we
right.
wouldn't get this award, because a big component in the considerations is leadership engaging, actually engaging in this work.
And here's the thing I would say to you, and I appreciate that perspective, because I think it speaks to this notion that those in Joe's example, enrollment and data or assessment are not mutually exclusive. They're actually very related, right? I too am in 3 enrollment meetings at least a week, right? One of them I have direct control over, which is the Undergraduate Recruitment Council. In that particular one, though, and actually to his credit, even in the president's one, he does expect that we are bringing to bear data. Like, he wants to know what's working, right? But, to what extent are we actually doing X, Y, and Z in Westchester County, right? Show me the data on that, right? So they don't need to, function independently. I do think sometimes, though, trying to draw that connection is increasingly difficult. And I think some of it may be the discomfort people have in data, and some of that is looking at data that may not be overly complementary to things. It's hard to be self-critical on stuff, right? But again, I'm just going to sort of underscore that, to me, is where there's the greatest opportunity for improvement. If my applications have bottomed out on Long Island, which they have, right? It used to be a huge place I get applications from. I need to unpack the factors that have contributed to that. And invariably those factors are have data supporting them, right? Does it have to do with high school graduation rates, right? Does it have to do with socioeconomic factors? That is the economy on Long Island, in Suffolk and Nassau counties, right? What are those factors? And some of that makes people's heads hurt. I understand that, but that's what we're paid to do, right? Like, I need to raise enrollment. There's a funnel. The top of the funnel is inquiries and applications. I need to understand what traditional age. I'm not discounting the adult learner, although that's sort of in a separate bucket, right? The traditional age learners, who I'm engaging in a very traditional form, right? We're coming up on this demographic cliff. What are we doing differently, right? In New York State, I can't really speak to the national thing, although I probably should have, I probably could look at the witchy data, but Hispanic, Asian, and 2 or more races, mixed race students are the only demographics that are increasing over the next 10 years, right? Not Black, certainly not white, Latino and Asian by double digits, and then mixed race. So during my recruitment council meeting, we pulled that stat up. here are the demographics that are increasing. And incidentally, last week, the University of Albany was recognized with the Seal of Excellencia as a Latino student serving institution. And on Friday, President Biden appointed President Rodriguez to the White House Commission on Equity, Excellence, and Success for Latino Students. Something I'm butchering what it was. It was a huge deal, right? Very close to the White House. He showed me pictures. It was very neat. So my thing to them on Tuesday was that we know that one of the three demographics are Latino. We know that our president is Latino. We've gotten these huge accolades. What are we doing? What are we doing to capture the corner of that Latino market in New York State, right? That's a data-informed discussion, right? We're not spinning our wheels, right? I'm not saying like, oh, I need the white kids from Fairport, New York. That's where I'm from, by the way. I'm a white kid from Fairport, New York. I'm not sure that's a demographic I've got white kids from Fairport, New York. They're here. I see them, right? I make a point of making sure I take my kids from the high school out to lunch. But like, really, I'm not saving the day on those kids. On the Latinos, on the Asian students, on the, we've grown, there was a period where we had like 0 Asian students in the honors college, right? The hashtag was, honors college so white was what it was 3-4 years ago. We shifted that because the honors college didn't look anything like the University of Albany. That was a data-informed decision that we made. And we made investments in scholarships, in receptions, in outreach to try to get there. But that's all data, right? Some of it's our data. In this case, the data I was sharing with you was not, I think it was witchy data actually that we were looking at. It's okay. I mean, it's still telling us a story, right? It's still information that we need to know. Look, at the height of the pandemic, the height of the pandemic in New York State, I should say, because I know there was waves throughout the country. But in our case, New York City and Long Island were very significant senders. Not just for us. There's a big population that's sending to a lot of places. That part of the world, that part of the country got significantly depressed economically, right? High unemployment, high death rate, particularly among individuals from low socioeconomic status, right, of which our students come from. So they weren't coming up to Albany for college. They couldn't afford to. They didn't want to leave home. They were terrified. We saw that happening in real time, right? We saw the decline. We then pivoted very quickly to make a very strong case in the 10 county surrounding region of Albany, right? We packaged it hometown advantage, your hometown university, right? And over 3 years, 40% increase in local hometown enrollment, right? Who, by the way, are higher achieving and yield at a higher rate, right? So those are 2 metrics that I would kill for anyway. And they're right in my backyard, right? All of those conversations were data was in the space with us, and it was on Zoom, right? But that was what we were leaning on to make these decisions and determine investments. Limited resources. I was going through a massive budget cut during COVID, by the way. I had to cut $1.3 million of my budget. I still found a way to make a case for the Hometown Advantage program, for retention grants, and for completion grants, right? The president still made the investments because I was able to show him evidence, data, that these modest investments, right, the $125,000 for first-time, full-time students who had a hold on their account, because we know that holds will then prevent them to register, would then net you more revenue, because if not, Joe is stopping out, so you're actually losing all of Joe's money. You free up that $500 hold, and all of a sudden he registers, and you're actually making all that money and then some, right? It wasn't a hard case to make, but it was data that we had readily available to us.
So I want to tee up Paul because he had a related question here about.
I didn't even notice the question in the chat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but Paul, I know Mike talked a little bit about some enrollment data pieces, so I don't know if you want to amend your question at all, or just ask it as is. But feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, Mike. I work at a community college outside of Chicago here, and you talked a little bit about data. And after I posted this question, you talked a little bit more about asking for the data. Certainly, that's one way that you can get your folks to provide data. But we're awash in data down here at the college, but we don't have a lot of folks that use the data.
Yeah.
We don't get anyone that puts data into a narrative format for us. So it's just presented pretty much as raw data to us. So there's not a story attached to it.
Right.
And we don't necessarily have, I know Barbara had written, how to get people not to be afraid of it. Well, our folks aren't afraid of it. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
So how do we create that culture where people are asking for it, looking for it, trying to use it? Because it seems like you're able to do that at your place.
Yeah. Great question. And I don't think we've gotten fully past this notion of the paralysis that comes from being overwhelmed by data, right? Overrun by data. I think that still happens. And I'll go back to my Akuholai. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the Akuholai residence life survey. It's massive. It was. I'm not sure if it still is. It was a massive instrument. I mean, we're talking hundreds of questions. And then you get these tomes, these massive binders. They say this was some time ago. I'm guessing now it's probably all online, but they used to mail you these big. You'd wait for the big envelope to come, and then you just start paging through it. And I remember sitting at the director of residential life's conference table with her and with our director of institutional research, just being like, well, I don't know where to be. Where do you begin? And at that time I didn't know what I didn't know, but in retrospect, I'd say, you almost, open the book and sort of, all right, there, I'm going to start there. Cause you got to start somewhere. You've got to pick some data point that tells you a little bit of a story that you can then dig into more. So, for us, it was the housing sign-up process was routinely coming as a tension point with our students. And so we then began digging in terms of where are there other associated sort of questions that relate to the housing sign-up process. And we sort of extracted those and ended up dissecting it in a bunch of different ways, class years and demographics and things of that nature, and really sort of got at what we could do to solve it. And we did. I mean, we ended up investing actually in a very sophisticated online housing sign-up platform that took, one of the things that came out of the Akuholai over a couple of years was that students felt that they were in an adversarial relationship with our residential life staff, because you came to sign up and you're on that side of the table and I'm on this side of the table, and the housing sign-up boards are behind me and there's no space. So all of a sudden you hate me or you dislike me because there's no room for you. What the online system allowed us to do was the computer became the enemy. And then all of a sudden, I'm a res life staff member. I'm actually standing next to you. I'm helping you as you're walking up to the machine to find your room. And so 2 years later, we were on a regular cycle of Akuholai, and noticeable difference, like huge difference in terms of the housing sign-up experience. But that Akuholai survey, Paul, had like 300, there was all types of data points. We couldn't have delved into all of it. It wouldn't have been a good use of our time, quite honestly. It was really trying to zero in on one or two things that we felt we could make the greatest impact on. I'm not suggesting that's easy to do, by the way, because obviously somebody needs to sort of make a determination on where sort of the priorities are, right? In this case, I'll acknowledge that our director of Res Life and the associate VP for student affairs had an interest in this housing sign-up thing. So they had already sort of nudged in that general direction. That's not to say we didn't do anything with the rest of the data, but if you can find one or two things that can be attributed as a win, that goes a long way. And that, I will say, just to go back to my opening comments, that I think actually went further in terms of establishing a culture of assessment than anything else I could have done. It was just getting people in units to identify a metric or a data point that they could grab onto and help improve. And once we started doing that, all of a sudden people got more into it, because it was like, oh yeah, like, our orientation director, she'd been a small one person unit, had no interest in doing assessment. She basically said as much to me. And then I really pressed her on, sort of moving away from satisfaction data, which I think, literally witnessed her head explode when she was in front of me, right? She said, "What do you mean I get no satisfaction?" Like, right? And I'm like, Mary, what does satisfaction tell you? Like, the student didn't like diversity training. Are you going to stop doing diversity training? No. You probably need to do it differently, potentially, but you're not going to stop doing diversity training, right? Right. What are they learning? All right. So then the following summer, she scrapped her satisfaction evaluation, and she went to a complete. It was like a 5-question learning outcomes assessment, basically, right? This is basic stuff. This was not rocket science, right? Define diversity and inclusion, right? And you'd have the student, because we would say it during the training. We would institutionally, we would define it for them. We wanted you to write it, right? Once she captured that data, we're like, wow, like 92% of participants accurately define diversity and inclusion. Much better than satisfaction, right? It was a win for Mary, though, right? It was a total win, because at that moment, we held Mary up as an exemplar. Look at Mary. She oriented 2,500 students, and she knows that 92% of them can define diversity and inclusion, right? That was the win that Mary needed. And then all of a sudden, before she retired, I'm actually talking to a retirement party. She became like my poster child for assessment. This was a woman who was working in higher ed for like 37 years, had no interest in doing assessment, had a series of wins that we stood up as like, this is a great early way of sort of doing learning outcomes assessment. Super rudimentary, by the way. But in the report out, in the annual report, way better than 99.9% were satisfied with their orientation experience. The hell does that mean? What does that mean? 99%. Tell me why that 0.1 wasn't satisfied. What's going on there, right? I mean, this is sort of the thing. So it's trying to zero in on it, but again, Paul, I don't know how I'm not going to tell you I know how to do it. I mean, some of it requires leadership. Actually, a lot of it requires leadership, and a lot of it requires unit heads and deans and directors to know what kinds of things they need to measure.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's helpful too. I like that idea of taking some data and using it to solve a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody gets a quick win with it too. That's good. Thank you.
Marky or Barbara, I'm not sure which one of you maybe wants to go, because I know you both had questions.
Marky, you want me to go? Mine was kind of connected to this data conversation. Hi, I'm Barbara.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm interim VP. Shout out to the interims.
Yes, way to go.
At a community college not far from Paul's, actually. So in Illinois. So I'm on the academic side, like the credit-bearing faculty side of the house. And my biggest challenge is convincing people that the data is really true and that there's not a reason why it's not true. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or why the data maybe doesn't have anything to do with them, but it really does. And to keep people from saying, well, if only marketing would market more, then it would be better. Have you had any, do you have any pearls of wisdom for me?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, great question, Barbara. I'm not sure if pearls of wisdom, but I struggled for a long time early on in this space when I would share data, and I'd have that super smart young professional who actually, I think thinks they're smarter than they actually are, would be like, well, what was your response rate on that? Like, is this valid and the whole thing. Look, it would drive me crazy. And when I was an AVP, I treaded very carefully in this space. I will tell you these days, particularly 7 years into it, you could press me on this and I will basically rip your head off, because I'm not screwing around anymore. Like, it's not about assessment is, in my opinion, and you can agree, Joe can still disagree with me. It's not about the response rate. If I'm walking across the podium and a student shares their experience with me, I said, response rate of 1. Yeah, it is. And it's still an experience that they had, right? So don't discount, right? I get my response, your response rate wasn't over 18% on your Akuhoai. Well, shoot, I still had like 1,600 kids respond. Am I totally not ignoring that? I'm not looking to publish it. I'm just looking to make a difference with the data I've got. So I've been there with that a little bit. And to be fair, Barbara, nobody questions it anymore. Like it just like they get that even the data point, the anecdotal data point, right, which maybe isn't really a data point, is still worth some sort of potential inquiry about, honestly, right? If a student says to me that they had a bad experience with an advisor, I'll still mention it to the provost. You don't have to do anything with it, right? And I've been in student affairs long enough where I know that the truth lies somewhere in between, by the way, right? The student had a really bad experience. The advisor says this thing. I tend to lean a little bit more closer to the advisor in these cases, but there's still some truth in both instances. So there is that. I just, I think it's about, long way of saying, it's really, those are just excuses. Those are all excuses, right? You don't want to deal with the real issues when you're, and it's not, I'm not saying say that because I don't want you to get into a thing, particularly as in an interim role, right? You don't want to piss anybody off, really. But those are tactics in my mind. Those are defense mechanisms, right? Which again, I saw early on. And then I saw it again. I mean, I saw it early on in the assessment space. I saw it again, though, when I took on enrollment management, because they were new to my division. We were seeking to do, I did, in fact, bring in external reviewers. And, there was the report out, and they got, again, not surprisingly, human condition is that we're going to get a little defensive on stuff. I still remember I had a colleague in the enrollment management space who we did a regular unit review, and the report came back and said some things that they did not subscribe to. They thought they were like totally off base. And I'm like, and so I talked through with them, like, do you understand that, like, they talked to you, they reviewed your self-study. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Like, I'll hear you out on this, but do me this favor. Let's think about how we can use the results of the report to actually help you, right? This was not intended to hurt you. It didn't, it said I don't need any more staff. It did, right? But it also said that there was a dearth of technology. So how about you and I work on making a strong case for investments in technology? Oh, right. So I feel like a lot of the fear is the defensiveness, quite honestly, with it. Like, I don't want you to know the dark underbelly of my unit and that kind of thing, right? And I think it's okay. Like, nobody likes to expose weaknesses. I mean, come on. But when we sort of try to flip it a little bit to, all right, it said no more staff, but there's 3 things that it says you need. 2 of these things you've actually been saying yourself. So how about we strategize about how we can do that? You know what I'm saying? It's trying to get them to shift the narrative a little bit. I don't know if that answers your question or not, Barbara, but okay.
Yeah. And Mike, I've, as you can imagine, been there, and I always tell, whether I'm consulting or entering a space, where there are some people who dig their heels in or push back on assessment, I always say, like, feel free to have the session dedicated to try to stump Joe.
Yeah.
Like I've not yet encountered a legit excuse to not engage in assessment work. You know, I stood in front of one of our colleges where they said, we're all primarily qualitative researchers. So this whole quantitative thing that you're pushing, we don't subscribe to, and we don't identify with that. So, you know, if that's what the institution's pushing, we're out. And I said, my whole presentation, I never even talked about qualitative versus quantitative data. I said, I give you all full permission to do your entire assessment fully qualitatively.
However you want.
I was like, so let's draw.
Their mind went there though, right? Their mind went there.
But for them, I was like, so let's draw up those assessment plans. How are you going to qualitatively assess your students in your classes?
Yeah.
Instead of doing papers, instead of doing tests, like, are you going to sit and interview all of them? Are you going to do focus groups in every single one of your classes?
Yeah.
Let's do that, because that's what you want to do. So let's do it. Like, well, no, we don't want to do that. I was like, okay.
All right.
And then your point about the sample size, you know, it's appealing to the teacher of like, would you stand in front of your class of like 10 students if they're all saying this is a horrible experience, and just go,
yeah, that's a great
all right, there's not enough of you complaining about this.
I can't take what you're saying. Yeah.
So I think, you know, it's a matter of connecting with them and appealing with their humanity. But as you said, I think it's a really great point of helping them see that, one, it's not about them, at least, especially assessment. It's about assessment of student learning, right? It's not assessment of staff and or faculty, and
exactly.
but also helping them see the bigger picture, and that there's things to have it work for you. But I want to pivot. Marky had a question a bit about the scope of your all's assessment.
Well,
hang on.
What don't we? I don't know what we don't.
I'll have her tee it up.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Marky.
I was just interested in what co-curricular and student services you assess, and what kind of assessments you use to measure the student learning in those programs.
Yeah, great question. So we the simplest, in my view, the simplest data is these, what we maintain in the sort of key performance indicator space, which is like, you know, heads and beds in the residence halls, clinical appointments, career appointments, students engaged in, you know, student activities, things of that nature. That's sort of the standard year to year, which, you know, I will say that in some ways it's like sort of set it and forget it for us institutionally. Like, you sort of expect 7,000 kids in the residence halls. It has been a little bit more interesting these days as we come out of the pandemic. Obviously, we significantly dropped off in some of these metrics in fall of 20. And then, you know, we've had these waves of COVID that have impacted housing, mental health issues on the rise, not just here, but nationally, interest in career and professional development, things of that nature. So those are the KPI kinds of things. At the unit level, you know, we continue to sort of focus on sort of learning outcomes. I think some units do it more than others. I mean, I think that residential life, our RAs are trained in such a way where when they're doing their programs, not program evaluation, but their programs evaluation, they do try to do 2 or 3 learning outcome specific things, right? You know, if you do a session on financial literacy, what are tangible things that are articulated during the presentation that the student can then reiterate, you know, through a post-session evaluation or a pre and post test, things of that nature. And that probably happens more in residential life, a little more in student activities with student leaders and the like. Fraternity and sorority life does more of that kind of assessment. I will tell you more broadly in recent years, and some of this may be sort of the integration of enrollment management, we have been interested in looking at retention persistence, particularly among different groups that we serve. So if you are in fact hitting the gym, right? So I know that our fitness centers are used at a certain rate, KPI. But if I can pull that card data and overlay it into an analysis on you know, retention or persistence information for students that have in fact used the fitness center, that gives a whole different sort of window into the student experience. And you know, and there's been stuff, just on the rec example, there's been stuff written nationally about, you know, there's a little bit of a a tipping point. You can use the gym. You know, and Joe's a pretty fit guy, right? So he's using the gym. There comes a drop off though. Like if you use it too much, the retention rate starts to fall. So, and that's, you know, Campus Rec NERSA has noted that. So it's looking at that kind of data more than anything. We've also used, I will say, we've also used data as it relates to what I would say is manually monitoring the student experience with respect to first year retention, right? So between fall to spring, we pull engagement data, who's not going to sort of major signature campus events, who's not going to the library, who's not going to the dining hall, who's not going to the fitness centers, right? That kind of stuff. And then trying to and it is manual. I wish it was not manual, but then trying to overlay those things in such a way where, hey, you know, Joe, first year student, here's a gift bag with some information about how you can get involved with Campus Rec sports or something like that, that then somehow maybe pulls Joe in. And we've done that in the winter with some success, some measure of success. And the cool part with that is, quite honestly, you know, first year we did it, we say, you know, there's 156 freshmen that didn't engage in any activity. We did this intervention and X number of those came back the following year, right? Now you press me on it, you say, well, what's the control group on that, right? How do you know that actually they wouldn't have come back anyway? It's a good point. But I'm still going to chalk it up as we made an impact, right? So that's some of the data that we get at. I'll also say that beyond just student experience evaluation, I've also tried in the last probably 18 months to be using data more explicitly as it relates to our staff's experience in the division. And I'll tell you why. I did a division meeting during the pandemic. I thought it went great. I ended up getting a series of emails from folks that were like, that was the worst division meeting I've ever been to. And I'm like, oh my God. So I got on Zooms with them because it was during the pandemic, and I discovered why. And I committed at that particular moment to evaluate division meetings every time thereafter, which it's a quick evaluation. You know, what'd you think, feedback, and what do you want to talk about next time, right? There's like a 3-question thing. But it has allowed me to sort of ground myself in what's actually happening during division meetings. Like it's easy for me to be like, oh, like I thought it was great. Like I literally, after this division meeting, went out into the hall and was like, guys, that was great. And then I got pummeled with like 5 emails from people that were like, that was terrible. Like, okay. So, you know, it's as much about students as it is, I think, about our staff as well, at least for me in student affairs.
Thanks, Mike. I know we're kind of at time, so if folks have to drop off, that's fine. But any final comments about quality assurance that you might impart for folks?
You know, my thing is that I would double down in this space, honestly. I think that it is completely worth whatever fight you need to broker in your day jobs, in your life, as it relates to providing excellence in the services that we put out for our students, right? I mean, the work we do, you know, I'm not trying to puff it up to be too much, and I'm not going to say like it's you know, hugely high stakes, but when you consider sort of particularly given the populations that we serve, that some of us serve, a college degree really can open up doors for you. And if we're not providing you, a student, your family, with the resources to be successful in that space, then in some ways the institutions failed you. And we don't, and there are, like we've talked about for the last hour, there are clear metrics. Retention rates are a clear metric of where the institution is at. And I will say this, and this will be my sort of final word, because, you know, an 83% retention rate is better than the national average for an institution like us, but not at the level that some of our peers are at. When you begin to sort of look at some of our peers, though, and you know, we're in SUNY, I didn't say that, the State University of New York. The other 3 university centers, based on data I just looked at yesterday, serve a far more affluent and far less diverse population than we serve. And so you know, and our president's been really great about reminding us on that. Like it's 83%, but it's 83% for who we are and who we're committed to serving. So is that fair to compare it to another university center in the state of New York? I won't name names. Who is not as diverse, who doesn't have as many Pell eligible students? I don't know. It's not exact. Is it apples to apples? It's just an interesting consideration. So commit to it, you know, double down in it because it's important. It's critically important. And it's not just important. It's not just important at accreditation time. It should always be important. And I will tell you this, if it's important during accreditation time and you only do it during accreditation, accreditors are no fools. I have an institution that I'm affiliated with that thought they could snow them a bit. They didn't. They got dinged really, really bad. Because you're just not fooling them. You're just not fooling them when it comes to that. You're not going to sort of do assessment for the 6 months before they get there and hope for the best. They know better. And it's actually a lot easier just to do it as a matter of practice than anything else. But thank you again. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. And it was great to spend some time talking with you all. And if I can ever be of any other assistance, Joe knows how to get a hold of me. So
yeah, well, thanks so much, Mike. It's been great. I know the folks who could join enjoyed, and I'm sure the folks who couldn't make it are going to enjoy watching the video. So I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and taking time with us.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you.